Hello. Welcome to episode 2 of Retrieving Reason podcast. I'm Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton. This is a podcast about philosophy. Specifically, it's about epistemology. And today my dogs are here with me in the studio, if you happen to hear them in the background. Last episode was a live recording at Arizona State University. We went over the broad plan for retrieving reason, the foundation for epistemology, which is today we're going to start to get into the details of that project. And by way of reminder, I want to use the rational presuppositional method to address the problems of epistemology. What is this method? It's a way of addressing more basic issues prior to less basic issues. And the more basic issues are logically prior. So we want to get back to the logically prior questions in epistemology and assumptions and methods. And so this idea of getting back to more basic brings us to the notion of foundations. If you notice, I'm talking about a foundation for epistemology, which is the most basic. And so today I want to talk about two themes, foundation and logos. And I'll be more specific about that. I want to talk about foundation as a metaphor first, though. If you think about building a house, which is an analogy I often use in teaching philosophy to introductory students, imagine putting a foundation on the ground. You want the ground to be level, to be solid, so you can build. And so I want to get to that idea. Perhaps epistemology is more like the ground rather than the foundation of a house. And we stick our foundation on that ground. But I want to get to that idea of building. We build a house. We build a world and life view on the basis of our basic assumptions, most basic assumptions. And the most basic assumption is, how do I know things? And that's epistemology. So in philosophy, epistemology is foundational. But maybe we should back up and talk about what is philosophy. I don't know that we've covered that yet. So briefly, I could mention two things about philosophy. One, in the Western world, it originates in ancient Greece. And it originates in the first philosophers distinguishing their method from the previous method in mythology, which is passed on by tradition. So the first philosophers wanted to use their senses to know the observable world. And what they noticed was that the world was very orderly, and our minds fit the world. So they called this order the logos. And the logos was in the world as natural laws, and it was in our minds as reason. So we can start with that very first search. They wanted to know why the world was orderly. Why does our mind fit reality? And they wanted to get to the ultimate source of that. They wanted to get to ultimate reality, or to what is eternal, the eternal logos. Now, there were lots of problems in grounding that logos in reality, particularly in the physical world with those first philosophers. But philosophy continues as that quest for the logos. What is the origin of the order in the world and the order in our minds, and why does it fit? Now, I'm bringing this up because the logos is also going to be part of epistemology. Even the word epistemology is the logos of episteme. So I want to come back to that. But briefly, logos is sometimes translated as reason or word or an account. So keep that in mind. Philosophy begins with a search for the ultimate grounds of that, the logos. We can also talk about philosophy in terms of its features. And there are several features, but I want to focus in on one as foundational, and this is philosophy as an area of study and a discipline, and it deals with foundational questions. So the most basic questions we can ask in its three areas in epistemology, which is what I've been talking about, metaphysics, which is what is real or eternal, and ethics, what is the good life. So I'm focusing on epistemology because it comes first in the order of our thinking about reality. Now, there's a long history of people arguing what comes first, metaphysics or epistemology. I'm starting with epistemology because we find ourselves in the middle of things and we want to know why it is like this. What is it that we're experiencing? And it's the first place to start in our experience. All right, so philosophy is an area. It deals with foundation and goal. Foundational questions and the goal of life. So some of the foundational questions is knowledge possible? Is it clear to reason whether God exists or not? Can we know things by reason, or do we have to just assume things? Can we know things through our senses, our intuition? So first, how is knowledge possible? And we also want to ask basic questions in other areas. In metaphysics, what is eternal? What are the sources of being, matter, spirit? And then in ethics, we want to ask about the good life. But here we're focusing on epistemology, and it's a foundational area in philosophy. It's also philosophy we can think of as the foundational discipline in the academy. Plato begins the academy, and the academy is based on philosophy. If you think of the other disciplines within the academy besides philosophy, they all assume a philosophical view. They assume a view about ultimate reality, even if they don't state it. For example, think about the sciences, biology, chemistry, physics. They assume the material world exists. They assume epistemology too, like our minds fit the world and we can study and we can use the scientific method and our senses to test the world. So other disciplines have philosophical assumptions. Now, this is going to be interesting because if we get those assumptions wrong at the beginning, then what we build upon those assumptions is going to be false. So this is why epistemology is so important. If we get the small things wrong at the beginning, the big things like the goal of life later on down the line when we're building a world and life view will also be incorrect. All right, so philosophy is an area. It's a foundational discipline, foundational to the other disciplines in the academy. And as such, its success or failure will impact the rest of the academy. And since everyone, well, not everybody, but most people are educated in the academy, the university, the whole of society will be affected if we get the basic things wrong. So foundation is important for our own knowing and our own world and life view, but it's also important for all of society because all of society will take on the assumptions of the academy unless there are some free-thinking rebels out there who are willing to question the assumptions of the academy. All right, so we've been talking about philosophy as an area of study, a foundational area, but we can also talk about philosophy as an attitude, and as an attitude, it is a love of wisdom. It's also a method, and perhaps today in the analytic side of philosophy, we emphasize this method. It's the critical use of reason. And notice, reason's the emphasis, the critical use of reason. And by reason, we can define reason as the laws of thought. And we'll get into that soon, maybe in a couple episodes. Reason is the laws of thought, and reason is the test for meaning. And we can say that meaning is more basic than truth. Meaning is foundational to truth. If we don't understand what something means, we can't affirm whether it is true or not. Oftentimes in class, I put on the board, Blix are grew. And these are kind of meaningless words, but I ask the students, is that true or false? And they get a little confused. Blix are grew. It's a statement that looks like it's a judgment, and judgments are either true or false, but because the words have no content, it's meaningless. And so we can't make a claim about whether it's true or false. So meaning comes before truth. And while we're talking about that, meaning is connected to forming concepts, which is the first act of reason. But we go beyond meaning. We want to know about what is true. And truth is connected to judgments, which is going to be the second act of reason, the second act of the mind. But we don't want true judgments. We want knowledge that our judgments are true. So that's another level. And knowledge is going to be gotten through arguments. I'm kind of giving you a preview of where we're going. But we don't just want knowledge. We don't want like bits of knowledge. We want to connect what we know together so that we have an understanding. And we want a broad understanding of the world and all its parts and our place in it and our place in history. So understanding is bigger than knowledge. And we don't want just understanding. We want wisdom. And so wisdom is the highest pinnacle of philosophical achievement. So says I. But you can prove me wrong. And so the attitude of philosophy was the love of wisdom, and we have this method, the critical use of reason, that will help us to gain wisdom. And it's a step-by-step approach. Remember that rational presuppositional method, starting small with meaning. What do you mean? And then working our way up. Meaning, truth, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and wisdom is the highest. Okay, philosophy can be defined as an application. And as an application, this is applied to ourselves, self-examination. Socrates talked about the examined life. The unexamined life is not worth living. This is applying philosophy to oneself. He also talked about this as part of the care of the soul. So if you love yourself, you will examine yourself to see if you have knowledge of the highest things. Do you actually have wisdom, or do you just think you have wisdom? All right, so I've defined philosophy as an area, as an attitude, as a method, as an application. Lastly, it's a system. And as a system, this is where it connects to your world and life view that I've been talking about, where you make sure that the parts of your philosophy of life are coherent. And the parts are, again, your epistemology, your metaphysics, your ethics. When you put the assumptions that you've formulated together, are there any contradictions in the system? And reason is the tool that would tell you if there were contradictions in the system. Now, I've been talking about your world and life view, your philosophy of life, but we could also talk about cultures as shared systems of value where people have a shared philosophy of life or a shared world and life view. We can also talk about civilizations, which are cultures that are using institutions such as the family, the state, religion, education, the economy, to put the values into practice in such a way that they will last from generation to generation. Now, I'm bringing this up because as a system, we are in the West. We have the Western philosophical tradition, and the values of the West have been inculcated in our institutions, and it seems to me that those institutions are broken. There are systemic problems in the institutions, and I'm making the claim that it's because we've gotten the epistemology wrong. And if we've gotten the epistemology wrong, we've probably gotten the metaphysics wrong and the ethics wrong. Or at least in the West, there is a deep divide between, let's say, materialism and theism, and the way those two metaphysical assumptions have come to expression, and the problems have been exposed. There have been challenges, and how those challenges have been responded to, if they've been responded to at all, or if they've been responded to poorly. Those challenges are there for us now. We have challenges, and that's why I'm focusing on this project of retrieving reason, because of the challenges that we face. Okay, so that was about philosophy as a system. Now, let's talk a little more about epistemology and logos. I mentioned philosophy is the search for the logos. Now I want to talk about epistemology. The episteme part is knowledge, the Greek word for knowledge. The ology, sometimes we say it's the study of, but let's think about it. It's the logos of knowledge. And the logos is the organizing principle. So when we study epistemology, we're asking what is knowledge and what is it not? We're identifying knowledge and distinguishing it from non-knowledge. What are its organizing principles? What is the structure of knowledge? So epistemology is the area of philosophy that asks and attempts to answer the question, how do we know? So it's connected to methodology, right? Defining knowledge and the method for gaining knowledge. Again, why is this topic important? I'm going to make the claim that all the world's problems are due to the failure to use reason critically, and reason is the primary tool in epistemology, and wisdom is needed to repair the damage in the institutions I just mentioned. And where is wisdom to be found? If philosophy is the love of wisdom, then we should be able to find some wisdom here, right? And if not in the content, perhaps in the method. All right, so let's tie some things together. We have this theme of the logos. Philosophy is the search for the logos. Epistemology is the logos of knowledge. And we're talking about foundations. Epistemology and foundations. How do we tie those together now? Epistemology is foundational to philosophy. It's logically prior to metaphysics and ethics. It's the bedrock upon which a foundation and a world and life view are constructed. If we get things wrong here, all else will be off course. And it does seem that currently a lot of things in the world are off course. So what can we do? I'm going to propose that the most basic piece in epistemology is reason. Reason itself. And then we need to figure out, what do we do with reason? How do we use it? Reasoning. And then how is reason an aspect of our nature as human beings? We're rational beings, but what does that mean? So that's where I want to go in future episodes. But before we do that, we've got to clear the ground of some obstacles. You know, if you've lasted this far into this episode of the podcast, I give you a high five. You know why? Because most people can't think for that long. Why is that? We don't particularly enjoy thinking. So in the next episode, I want to talk about Proto Epistemology. And proto means before or first. So I'm calling Proto Epistemology a necessary existential starting point for doing epistemology. And basically, it's a ground clearing exercise. If we're going to lay a foundation on the ground, we need to clear out debris. And there's a lot of debris in our thinking. And so that's what I want to talk about in the next episode. Again, thank you for your patience in listening this far. Sorry, I'm trying to get my notes together, and the dog has my note. He's a good dog, though. All right. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Retrieving Reason. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode if you enjoyed it. And you can find this podcast on iTunes podcasts or Podbean podcasts. They're both listed under Public Philosophy, which is a broader project I'm working on. Or you can find it on my YouTube channel under my name, Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton. Again, thanks for joining me.